of 9 videotapes provides an opportunity to share in a unique experience where Stafford Beer introduces an audience to the world of managerial cybernetics. The event took place over 5 days in July 1994 at the Falcondale Hotel near Lampeter in Mid Wales. It was organised by the Liverpool Business School at John Moores University, where Stafford is Honorary Professor in Organisational Transformation and a Senior Fellow. The aim was to provide a video learning resource by recording discussions between Stafford and an audience that had little or no previous knowledge of the subject. Over the course of the event, Stafford explains the development of the subject from the initial scientific discovery of cybernetics. Through his own development of managerial cybernetics, he introduces the tools and models that he has created to offer an alternative approach to conventional management practice. The resulting material embraces the key principles and models that have previously been introduced in his 13 books and referred to in many of his published papers. This is the first learning resource where all these have been brought together in one integrated way. Managerial cybernetics continues to be the only available scientific and coherent account of effective managerial practice. Stafford provides numerous anecdotes, applications and insights from the perspective of practitioner, manager and scientist. Session 7 begins with a discussion of how the teams are modelling their System 1 and organisational recursions. Significant time is used to review this stage of modelling, reflecting the importance of defining System 1s as they deliver the total system purpose. However, Systems 1 alone would not be sufficient to account for the total system viability. The remaining types of subsystems, Systems 2, 3, 4 and 5, are now added to the basic model and related to common management activities such as audits, resource allocation, scheduling, strategy and corporate planning. Each subsystem is also illustrated in the context being analysed by the study teams. Stafford shows how templates of various parts of the viable system model can be used to cut down on viability modelling time. The focus of this session is the group of subsystems comprising 1, 2, 3 and 3 star, which deals with the inside and now, and which is comparable to the human autonomic nervous system. Discussion of its properties leads to the principle that management should intervene only enough to maintain the coherence of the whole.
Let's start. I left you with that part of the diagram, and you were supposed to be trying to find out what the Systems 1 were of your group, and I wondered if you'd like to begin by a quick rundown on that. Nominate a group, somebody.
Well, the Welsh Parliament one.
Right.
We've got slight problems with it. A lot of problems. Because we're talking about Parliament, not government, so civil servants and all that is
out.
It's obviously involved. And we thought that maybe constituencies might be.
Aren't you going to have any ministers?
Oh, yes. Or even political parties.
Oh, well, yes, that's a different thing altogether, yes. What I usually do, and I've actually gone to the lengths of bringing a paper called Disseminated Regulation in Real Time, or How to Run a Country. And I've brought that for you, which I will give you at the end of the day, because it's got the whole model in it. But what I usually do, and I've done a lot of this, you see, is I take the ministries, because forget the civil service, the ministries themselves are a legislative affairs. The minister has to get stuff through into law, doesn't he? So I start with that, and then the regions of the country, usually in the environment. Now you could do that by constituencies, but you'll be accused of gerrymandering. There are various ways to do it. What I want you to get the feel of at the moment is quite simply that each of those things is supposed to be a viable system in its own right.
I mean, I could see different system works might see some ministries. But then what I couldn't relate to was that. I mean, would then a minister be
one of the square boxes, yes.
And then the round middle bit is
the process that he's got under his control, or hopes he has, which probably includes the civil service, you see, but it's going to include in the long run the programs that this guy is trying to deliver.
Yes, but if we're just looking at the Parliament rather than government,
right?
Then I mean the process is the process of getting the laws.
If that's where you're sticking, yes. You know, all times with this stuff, you have to keep the levels of recursion very clearly in mind.
Yeah.
See, the Parliament is going to be embedded in a whole system of government, isn't it? Yeah, got you. Well, that's coming along. Let's not spend too long on this. I just want you to feel that you're making some progress. And when you've got the whole model, then you will say, I see it all now. And if not, I shall have gone. What's another group?
The retail group.
Retail.
I had an excellent example this morning in the paper, which gave us a chance to really study the system more. And that was it WM?
More sensitive.
Low.
Is Sainsbury's or Tesco going to manage to take over and all the rest of it?
Right.
So this is we were having a problem with which level of recursion we were going to work at, didn't we? Because does retail include? Do we have to include all the manufacturing process as well? Because it's still all related, or do we just do it at one company level? Or we had a problem as well how much we were going to entail at first, didn't we?
Yeah.
So this helps us this morning because we were able to put this one situation
It was talking about the board of WM Lewis.
Yes.
Low. WM Low. Recommending that this takeover should take place. And so we're really looking at the board,
right,
which could easily be a higher level within a system of WM Lewis. But then we were thinking that no, it's a system one within commerce, if you like. It's a system
yes, well, levels of recursion again, you see. And that,
it had a long time to get to grips with this.
yes, well, I'm not surprised. I mean, these ideas are pretty complicated, you see. This is why I'd like you to try it out. Now, when you say retailing, see, retailing can be like Sainsbury's, an end in itself, or it can be part of a manufacturing company with a retail arm. So that's the next level of recursion up. Sainsbury's hasn't got a next level of recursion up, except for the industry of which it's part. And then you get Sainsbury's and I've run out of names, Tesco's, etc. Yes. Good, so much for that. That's starting. Next one.
Two really nice articles. One on Gillian Shepherd, the takeover from patents. That was nice because she'd addressed the the most non-militant unions, and it was all full of increasing variety. Very good example of that. So the system ones in that we decided were that union assembly. Also the systems of secondary, primary, tertiary
education.
That kind of thing. That's quite nice.
And then the government, wasn't it the government body?
Oh yes, and the fact that she was being advised by someone who had,
Well, I think you may find out that some of the things you've mentioned belong elsewhere in the system because, for instance, an advisory body is certainly not what the system's there to do.
Right.
You know? And that's your criteria. And always, please, when you do think you're focusing on the level of recursion you want to study, always look at the one lower down and the one higher up. Then you get the sense of being centered. That's very valuable. Tip.
The other one was about success of boys against girls. Girls seem to be achieving better exam results, so they've decided to remove boys from the system and educate them in isolation.
Where?
Well, one school in particular.
Well, that's not going to do it again, any good, is it?
One, no. This school in Sheffield, there's, although it's co-ed, it's having single-sex classes.
Yeah.
And they're teaching these girls, whereas there was also, in the same article, a good example of another school which has said, yes, boys don't perform because their language is poorer than the girls, they don't talk as much, their attitude is different, etc., etc. And they pinpointed these things and actually worked on them and said, well, instead of having hands up, let's have the answer. We'll always have them working in pairs, so they increase their language. And this is actually having a positive knock-on effect with standards.
It sounds like it to me. I thought we seem to be going backwards, don't we? Incredible. Well, the simplest way to look at the education thing in the practical sense as distinct from government is it's obviously what you've included in that is to take primary, secondary, tertiary, further, and so on as branches of education, all of which are systems one. And then within that, you get to a particular school, for instance, and you're at several layers down now, and now you've got forms, classes, whatever you're going to call them. And it makes a very neat model, this education one. We have another one?
Probably the British Rail. That was quite awkward. You don't really know how to separate it into systems, whereas you do it by kind of like by station sort of first, but that's not really.
By what, Claire?
By station, but that's not really any use.
No.
Sort of doing by region, which is alright for like the ones that stay in that region, but it doesn't work for the ones that go through like a few regions, or by the path of one train. You know, you really don't like that.
You're talking about the whole of transport, so the first breakdown surely is going to be railroad, telepathy. Okay, well, you're getting the hang of this. Now, we better get on with this wretched model. Now, as you see, system one is what you're in business for, whatever you're doing here. So that's why I spent so long on it. It is crucial. And the rest falls into place around it, as I said. Well, now, if it's so important, next question is, why isn't that it? Why do you have to do anything else? I'll try and demonstrate to you what's going to go wrong straight away. We have given powers to each of these strips, the horizontal axis. We have used the argument that unless the management is allowed to use its skills to the full, it's going to have a hell of a job getting its variety across its own neck of the woods. And we've said that that people should have autonomy. And I hope you realize from this argument that autonomy is a relative thing and not an absolute thing, and that's why it's so damn difficult to handle in practice. It's a bit like the business of the viable system. We said that viable systems exist independently, and then we found out that, of course, we don't actually mean totally independently. And in this same way, we don't actually mean total freedom. Because what's going to happen is this, that this fellow and this woman, these two management units, pursuing their own goals, which they're told to do and entitled to do, are going to clash, aren't they? Now, let me give you, I want to make it as graphic as possible. I've mentioned steel several times because it's strongly connected. Iron, steel, rolling, you go straight down from a chunk of ore to a piece of watch spring. Now, supposing you're in the middle, your management in the middle of this, and you would then say, because you're trying to optimize your performance, you say to the previous department, I want 10 tons an hour, always, all the time, because that's going to keep me nicely moving, see? The guy that you're addressing has just sent you a bit of electronic mail saying you're going to get the whole blessed lot on a Friday afternoon. Naturally, he can't afford to make it in 10 tons an hour for you. He's got other people to look after. So clash. And then the people that you are serving on this downward path, you say to them, we are going to send you your stuff, and they are coming back to you saying, oh no, thanks very much, we need it on these days. So the potential for the clash is gigantic, especially in the strongly connected case. So what are you going to do? You can't come down that red line and tell everybody what to do. That is absolutely destructive to everything we've been trying to understand. And that is the reason, you see, for System 2. Have I got another colour here? No, I think I'll stick to black here. System 2, which I depict like this, all these are ones. System 2 exists precisely to control oscillatory behavior between the systems 1. And you'll notice that it isn't a command function. You remember my story about the Bible and breaking it up? Everybody can see that this is required. Now, I first realized this when I mentioned to you that I was production controller of the steelworks when I was very young. I was 23. Now, hoary old steelworks managers, melting shop Yorkshiremen, and even worse, blasphemous Lincolnshiremen, they are not going to take a lot of lip from a 23-year-old with a pretense of being an academic, intellectual person, by no means. But they can see that unless someone sorts out this muddle, it's going to blow up, more or less literally. The oscillations start like that and then go like this, as we all know. So that's the job. And if you play it cleverly enough as a service, then nobody's going to get upset and nobody's going to feel that their personal autonomy is being infringed. So that's a big secret. Now, let's take the school example, because this is a well-nigh perfect example. What in a school with a lot of classes, big, comprehensive, let's say, what is the System 2? No, the teacher's in the box trying to run the class. No, got it in 1 or 2. Yes, the timetable is the thing that stops everybody arriving in one place simultaneously and saying, please sir, Miss told us to come here, and you've got 500 people trying to get into the same room, and all the teachers going somewhere else. I mean, good heavens. So this is a perfect example of that, and I never met a teacher who said, I'm victimized by the timetable, I'm not allowed to do my thing for that reason. There are other reasons why teachers aren't allowed to do their thing. They're mostly called Mr. Patton, I think. However, the timetable is obviously a service. And if you are a teacher and you have to go to the dentist in a hurry, you look at the timetable and you say to your friend, I see you've got a free period, would you mind invigilating my class? And it's a really valuable service. So we've seen that in the steelworks, we've seen it in the, now what are the other projects? Retail. Where do you, well now we haven't yet established for sure which level of recursion you're at.
Well, we started off when we originally looked at it at the level of an actual store.
Yeah.
So store management, local management, imagine any DIY company.
Yes.
Large DIY company.
DIY, I see. I was thinking you set me off on groceries, you know, with Tesco and so on. Yeah. Well, you tell me what System 2 is then. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You can't have all the, all this butter here and no marge sort of thing. And if you look at the whole of Tesco's, you've got a very interesting example because you've got all these stores dotted round in a region, let's say. It's probably a regional warehouse. And somebody has got to stop all that oscillating. You don't want all the butter in Hollandshaw and all the marge in Aberystwyth. So, what's the next example we're trying? I'll get used to this in a minute. Transport. Well, now, again, timetabling, obviously. Any more? Who else is with Claire? I don't want to pick on you. Oh, yes. Kathy, you try. The signals, you know, are likely to be, whether we like it or not, a red line phenomenon because they're mandatory. I mean, if you bust a signal, you're going to have a crash. That's no good. No, it's things a little more subtle than that. And again, I suppose timetabling is really the big example. And as we break up the rail system for privatization, it's quite evident that getting from one system to another, from one company to another, is going to be an absolute nightmare. Already, Lena found, she visits North Wales quite a lot. There's a bit of privatised railway up there, and they wouldn't tell her what intersects with British Rail. Didn't want to know. I mean, come on. So now, System 2, we've been looking at the most outstanding examples, but you see, anything that controls damps is the word, not controls, damps oscillation will count. Now, let me give you quite an odd example, because it might have occurred to you. If you've got a big company of any sort, and the individual divisions or sub-companies, whatever they're going to be, inside that, pursuing their public image, they design letterheads. Now, if you've got one of those companies saying, our perception is that we have to be staid and respectable, and they do a sort of Super Harrod job on the letterheads and so on. And another company says we're after the youth and so forth, and has a big jazzy affair, and they both say members of the something group on the bottom, this isn't going to work. So that's why you have a thing called a house style, and you have to study the requirements of all the bits and come to some agreement. Now again, with any luck, that won't be imposed from above. What I should say, if I were the managing director of a group like that, is at the management meeting, I would say to all the bosses of the units, the Systems 1 that is, nominate somebody, each of you please, to a committee to discuss this. And we'll hire the best designer we can think of, and between them they come up with something, and this is passed around, and I've done this often actually, works a treat. And nobody's going to accuse you of fascist behaviour if you play that, and that is a System 2, because it's stopping the oscillations that would set in if everybody tries to outdo everybody else and spends a fortune on designers and letterheads and God knows what.
Parliament is the System 2, the procedures.
I'm sorry, I forgot that, yes. Yes, well, yes, and the whip's office, you see, is going to be... Now, that's an interesting case, isn't it? Because a lot of parliamentarians regard the whips as fascist bastards, and they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to be there to smooth business. So that's a very nice example. But rules of procedure, what do they call it in Westminster? The Erskine May, is it? Anyway, there's a book that you look up, and the precedents and all this kind of stuff, which is administered by the Speaker. And again, you see, the Speaker is part of system, is the sort of head of System 2 in Parliament, isn't she? Because, although she occasionally does a red line job and says withdraw, throw him out, most of the time she's trying to damp oscillation. Doing a very good job too, as far as I can see. We've been very lucky with our speakers. Do you think that, who's that splendid Welsh chap before Betty Boothroyd? Tony Pandy, yes. I don't know why we can't get ministers we deserve. We got speakers we deserve. It's just System 2 in charge. It's not right. So now we've seen why we have to have a System 2. Do you think you've got that firmly? Because it's a very interesting thing and much misrepresented by people who try to use this model. They find the notion of anti-oscillation pretty complex. It is, but you grapple with it. So the result is that many people say it's the office function. Oh, good heavens, offices do all sorts of things, and I really annoys me to see this. I was just thinking, this will teach our worthy producer to open the windows up here. We're going to get blasted. Sorry, what did you say, Lee? Yes, you see, what I said to you yesterday was any line that appears on here is actually a loop, and I can't keep drawing loops all over the place because the System 2 is entering there and coming back out again. And actually, there's quite a complex thing going on at these interchanges. You'll find that when you get the full diagram, it's, good heavens, it's much more complicated than I'm drawing it. For instance, there is a triangle here in each case, which in the case of, for instance, of production control of the steelworks, these are local production controllers who own some sort of allegiance to this one because they're using a uniform kind of planning system, let's say, but also an allegiance across here. And one of the troubles with the old family tree organization chart, it became an item of faith that you couldn't have more than one boss. But this is clearly silly, in human affairs. In human affairs, we have all sorts of allegiances, and it's not that simple. That's why I said the family tree chart was a means for blaming, it's your fault, your fault, your fault, like that.
Those triangles that you just drawn aren't like those triangles on the arrows over there now?
Oh no, those are amplifiers. No, I beg your pardon. You see, there's a limited number of basic symbols that I use. The amoeba for environments, the circle for the process, the square for the management, and this triangle this way up for anti-oscillatory behavior. Now the green line has the triangle the other way up and looks like that. And that is System 3 star. Well, just a minute, we haven't got a System 3. Now I want to go on applying this rule that in trying to find out what the laws of viability actually are, what I did was say I will look at what is necessary and sufficient. Now, System 1 is obviously necessary because without it you haven't got anything. And then ask the question, is that going to be sufficient? And we said no, because of oscillatory behavior setting in, we must have a System 2. Now, can we stop there? Well, we could, but please note, there isn't anybody on the board at the moment who knows what's happening everywhere. Each of these people knows what he or she is up to, and probably knows something about the others, but not necessarily very much. Now, system 3, oh, dear me. Let's try again. System 3 exists precisely because it has the overall view. And that is where you're going to find all the management techniques that are known as optimizing techniques. Things like operational research, which insofar as they're dealing with optimization, you see, could result. Have any of you met linear programming? You will certainly have done, you too, yes. Well, these things take, these techniques, what are they doing in principle? They're taking chunks of activity here and putting them together and trying to get the optimal result for the whole. Now, in the limit, please note, that could result in sending for this person and saying, awfully sorry, old chap or old girl or whatever it's going to be, we don't need you. We make more profit without your thing. Although individually it's making a profit, we can invest the money better in a different mix. Now, that is an extreme case, but it betokens the fact that if you do look at this level at the whole, you can almost certainly improve the allocations, especially in some businesses, certainly in transport, certainly in retailing. I'm trying desperately to hang on to our examples. I don't think anything can improve past. I'm struggling. Schools, of course, you can optimize. You know, you're trying to get a group of classes together. You see this very much in further education. Elena teaches a lot in the further education system, and she doesn't know from one year to the next whether she will have a class where she had it last year, because it may get dissolved in the process of trying to optimize the budget. Then depends how many people come and where the subsidy is coming from and whether the class is paying. All that mix is going to give you a System 3 problem. So, given that this is now, we're running into senior management compared with local management, then obviously we're going to make System 2 dependent from System 3. That's where it's going to get its authority from. And so is System 3 star, because it's System 3 which is going to summon up these audits that we were talking about. You're going to cause things to be examined, either financially or man management or electric motors we were on about. And that now is the autonomic part of this system. Now, why do I say autonomic? I've often mentioned that this all began by studying viability in the human body with the models of human physiology, and particularly the mathematical models of the central nervous system, which includes the brain, of course. Well, it's worth mentioning this, I think, because it fixes it in your mind quite well. This is the autonomic nervous system we're talking about, where the systems one are the major functions of the body, things like the liver system and the kidney system and the respiration system. And you'll notice that they are autonomic. Now, that's a nice word, because the Greek here is self, of course, auto, nomos is law. And they are self-governing. And yet, obviously, they can't run amok. We can't have that. So it fixes it clearly in your mind that what is the meaning of this word autonomy, that I'm very, very anxious gets full airing in your thinking. And to think of the autonomic nervous system as representing that is quite helpful, I think. You see, I can't... how shall I put this? consider the debate that you have in management circles in all our examples. It's invariable that you have debates about centralization versus decentralization. And in our big institutions, it's come down to this, that you hire consultants and they say you are over-centralized, decentralize, and then the next time round you hire another lot of consultants that say you're very decentralized, this isn't the current wisdom, get more central. You have a joint buying policy, you'll save a lot of money. And this thing just goes back and forth like a pendulum. And I've really seen a lot of that in 40 years of this game. So, yes, what light does the central nervous system throw on that business of centralization and decentralization? Well, it's awfully obvious, isn't it? I'm talking to you, you're listening, bless you. We can't afford to take time off to remember to make our hearts pump or to breathe. If we did, we wouldn't be able to pay any attention. We'd say, oh my God, I've forgotten that. It's just ridiculous. So that is an autonomic function, and it goes on, and it's got requisite variety built into it, you see. On the other hand, if I say, there's my bus, I must catch it, I can go like that, suck in a whole lot of oxygen, totally interfering with the autonomy of the respiration system, you notice. And off I go and catch the bus. Adrenaline starts, all the necessary things happen with that intervention. Now, in our management model, you can intervene in that. If you're the top management and have got a good reason and think you can handle it, you can intervene. And of course, most of our industrial troubles and management troubles arise because of people intervening in things they should damn well leave alone. Or things where they don't understand the effects of their intervention, which is very much the common one. Wouldn't you agree?
The body, however, the body functions are changeable. They're not, you don't start off with your life with one set of autonomous functions.
That's right.
And then they change throughout your life. That's what habits are. Mm-hmm. Things that you go from conscious thoughts to subconscious thoughts and become habits. I suppose vice versa it can happen as well. You can lose habits.
It's not so easy, yes.
So it should be the same in
Dim Smiggy. Yes, well it is, isn't it? I mean, you start saying this is how we do it around here, and before you know, that's a useful habit at the start, and it ends up being a total resistance to any kind of change, and you go down the tubes. So you're quite right about that. I thought you were going to say that the body renews itself on a kind of 7-year cycle, you know, you renew all your cells. And I think that is really quite fascinating. Why am I still recognizable to someone I haven't seen for 10 years, given that I am totally reconstructed? So this really pinpoints the fact that systems are fundamentally a reflection of the relationships between the elements. That is what matters more than the elements themselves. That is why we were saying before, a hospital can be a hospital for sick children for hundreds of years, because all the elements are changing, but the relationships are firmly in place. Good. Well now, that's the argument for autonomy. Don't interfere unless you know what you're doing and have good reasons and all the rest of it.
The Parliament, British Parliament, as opposed to the wonderful Welsh Parliament we have got. 3 would be the government. No.
Trouble is, you see, we got a very difficult job of defining exactly what you're trying to mean by Parliament. Yeah. I mean, it's under some definitions, 3 could be the bloke who runs the building. See, leader of the house may be. Yes, that's a pretty good one. But again, we get back to whips, you see, fulfilling all these functions when they're only supposed to be system 2. but they manoeuvre and could finagle till the cows come home to manipulate the business of the house, which is a 3 function and not a 2 function.
We don't have another constitutional parliament with 3 head of state.
No, we haven't got the MOO yet.
Ah, right.
No. You see, a head of state is hugely emblematic for one thing, and this is getting on with running things. Now, I often refer to this system 321. I often call it that, which is what we've got on the board. And what I describe it as in all my writings is inside and now. Meaning, this is what's going on inside our organization, and it's in real time with a vengeance. And therefore, all the lines you see, all these homeostatic loops, ought to be in real time, and they never are. You've got awful lags and differential lags. Some things take longer than others to get through the system and so on. Oh boy. And all of this is so clear from a cybernetic point of view. If you go in to clean a place up, you can instantly see, once you've made this mapping onto the model, what you have to do. And that's really what I've spent my life doing, going around and, well, insofar as I've been using the VSM, I do other things. I get very tired of getting an albatross called the VSM around my neck. But yes, insofar as we are doing that, that is the trick. And I will move into a client's place, lie on the hotel floor in the bedroom into the small hours of the morning, making maps onto this model, and then go in and say, well, I can't understand how this works. And everybody goes white, and they think, who's the leak? Who's the spy? That's it really does happen all the time. It's a source of constant amusement to me. They've been trying to conceal this, but you can instantly see that System 2 hasn't got requisite variety, for example, you see. That's your criterion. And now we're well away from the problem of actually counting all these states, because we know what it means, and we can see that if you have a production control department of 3 men to save money, with no computers but a planning board to save money, and then you're trying to run the whole steelworks, it's not going to work. You see, requisite variety, come off it. And yet that's what they do. People were always saying to me at this practical level of business, which I haven't dealt with much in recent years because I've been working so much for government, they're always saying to me, we want a cheap and effective system. And this is practically an oxymoron, you see, because the more complex the business, the more complex it's just there. I'm sorry, it'd be very nice to. Now, there are simplifying things, of course, which come under the heading of amplification. One of my favourite thoughts about that is traffic. If everybody got onto the roads in motor cars and drove all over the place, there'd be instant chaos. And we have this thing called the rule of the road. And we drive on the left. If you're French, you drive on the right. But so long as everybody agrees which, there's all these jokes about the Channel Tunnel. What happens in the middle? Anyway, this rule of the road is a huge amplifier, isn't it? Because for one simple statement, keep left, you get a huge amount of regulatory power. You just think of what... Suppose nobody had stumbled on that. Haven't you discovered yet, Kate, that most things are both, depending on how you're looking at them? It's regulatory power on behalf of the people who are policing the roads and trying to make the system work. It's an attenuator of people who would like to drive willy-nilly. Quite right. But they very often, these loops are something, especially if it's a powerful thing you do, a systemically powerful thing, it's likely to have its amplifier element and its attenuating element both working on that same loop. Now, one of the diagrams I'm going to give you is a device for analyzing a homeostatic loop. And I'll show you it when we get there, but I thought I'd just mention it because it shows two blocks, and it shows all the transducers and all the channels and the criterion of stability in the middle. And you are invited to fill that in, you see, if you're using this technique. Well now, the interesting thing is, if you start trying to count the number of homeostats in this kind of diagram, you run into thousands almost instantly. You really do. It's quite alarming. So clearly you're not going to be able to do that for the whole shebang. And a lot of it would be repetitive anyway, because you're in a certain type of business, let's say, then certain patterns will keep reproducing themselves. But what it does enable you to do is if you're puzzled by something, if you don't like the look of something, if something keeps malfunctioning, move in there with this chart and analyze the hell out of it, you see, and say, I know what's the matter here. These transducers aren't working, or this channel has got to be opened up. So we're now beginning to get a grip on this thing, aren't we? And the last thing I want to say about this part of the diagram and about autonomy, which really applies to the whole diagram, but you can begin to see this emerge at this level of the inside and now, is the law of cohesion of a viable system. And that simply says that you restrict variety to the extent required to maintain the identity of the system and no more. Now, if you can adhere to that rule, you see that it gives you the okay to take away from people's autonomy, but only if that action is justified by coherent identity of the whole. And so many things where we intervene with people of authority don't have that sanction. When you analyze them, there's just interference, for God's sake. So that's what we want to bear in mind. Now, automatically that means that you have to drive decision down. You have to drive decision down the system to the smallest, most junior, trivial level where it can satisfactorily be taken. And what is the criterion for that? Have they got the information? If they can't, if you've got someone who's very junior and hasn't got the information to take the decision, then a decision has to rise in the organization. But you see, in real life, decisions rise in the organization for all sorts of bogus reasons, such as I'm not touching this with let somebody else put his head on the chop. But that's not good cybernetics.
It works the other way as well.
It does.
They don't let people put their head on
Yeah,
the chop.
it does.
Well, perhaps there should be
Absolutely.
to do so.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like you to remember that point, Glenn. In a little while we shall come to something where that is, I've caused an awful lot of trouble by my views on that very point. So much for the inside and now. Now, what does that suggest? We are dealing necessary and sufficient conditions for viability. We've got the inside and now sorted out. Can we leave it at that?
If it's important, this identity, we need a boundary for the system.
Yes, that's true. But we began by considering that, Kate, because, we said we've got to know what we're talking about. So you've got a boundary. Well, the boundary of this paper would do. Very hard to define, but you've got to try and define it. And you say that's where we're working. Now, may I repeat my question? We're dealing with the inside and now. What does that leave over?
Definition says it inside and out.
Absolutely.
Outside and future.
That's right. I call it outside and then. Yes. So that's System 4. Now, I feel a real need to justify these breakdowns. You see, you heard me carrying on no end about reductionism and so on, and the need for holistic thinking. And yet, as soon as you start work, here I go carving things up again. Now, the way things have got carved up in the past owe a great deal to history. Companies grew by takeovers and mergers and amalgamations and adding bits on and new bits of technology, and they're not coherent at all. They're probably coherent in somebody's mind who has decided to do that, but it really defies sensible analysis, by which I mean, if you look at any institution that's been around for some time and say to yourself, take the health service, say to yourself, we are spending more money on this than anything. It's the biggest business in the country. How would you design it, given that we've got all this money? It's inconceivable that it would be anything like what we've got because it is frozen out of history. And you try and tell a hospital that it doesn't exist any longer, it's going to be done some other way, they'll have a purple fit. So, partly it's historical, these divisions. Partly it's the functional divisions come out of professionalism. So you say, well, I'm the production man, and you can go, and you salesman can take a running jump. I'm the man who creates this stuff. And the salesman says, it's all, anybody could do that. If you can't sell it, it'll all stay in the warehouse. And so you get this functional division. Somebody else says, well, it's got to be financed, and none of you ginks know anything about money. I'm a financial wizard. And so accountancy grows and grows, and all these things become professions and have their own institutions, none of which helps, because they end up by fighting each other in a very real sense, I think. Now, all right, this is my attack on reductionism, and now what am I doing here? Well, you see, the thing is that you've got to have some division, or you're just talking about great blobs. You can't, there's no insight into anything so you've got to do something. Now, my defense of the 3 and 4 division is that it's very biological. If you look at biological systems, like the body, as I said, 3, 2, 1 is the autonomic nervous system and is easily understandable as such. 4 is easily understandable as the whole sensory system and the midbrain and limbic system, so-called, that sits on top of the old part of the brain. Now, this stuff ends about here. It's the spinal cord ending in the medulla pons, the bulb at the top, and the cerebellum, which is the thing that keeps you upright and stops you falling over and so on with good luck. And that is the old part of the brain. Then we develop this new thing which gives us foresight, which most animals don't have, you see. So that's a natural division. If you look at whole species, you find that the reproductive system is in there to keep the species going beyond the individuals. And that it really is a rather separate system from the one that keeps the individual alive. So I argue that if you've got to make a break, this is a pretty clever and sensible and understandable way of doing it. And so I come along with System 4. Now, please realize that this is not a hierarchy. Because it's drawn like it's drawn, people think it's a hierarchy. It never intended to be a hierarchy. So System 4 has a homeostatic loop which is doing this to the outside and the future. That's why the question mark. Now, please note, these are outside too. But these outsides are defined in terms of what each of these people is doing. So the totality of the company, of the company's environment, is this. It includes these outsides, and it includes a bigger outside that they're too localized to recognize. but which the company as a whole must recognise, and an unknown future. Now don't forget this is recursive. These people also have an unknown future, which is in there. The whole model is reproducible, don't forget, at the next level of recursion. So these people quite happily looking at their environment, saying we don't know everything about this and we don't know what the future holds and so on. But what I'm emphatic about is the awful mistake that people constantly make of thinking that the addition of the systems 4 of the constituent systems 1, are you with me, is that sum is the company's environment. And clearly it isn't. I mean, even the simple Venn diagram here about the amount of space we're using up, there's whole acres of stuff here which only the totality is going to be addressing. No, I mean, to try and make this more real, if let's suppose that we are dealing with an insurance company, and these horizontal lines are manufacturer's life in Canada, manufacturer's life in the United States, manufacturer's life in England, manufacturer's life in Hong Kong, all of which actually exist, by the way. Now, those local managers couldn't care less about the rest of the world or whether to set one up in Borneo. It's nothing to do with them. If you're running the Canadian enterprise, you could think whether you should have an extra office in Saskatchewan, but you wouldn't be thinking, well, perhaps we ought to have an office in Florida, except that you wouldn't get away with it, good. So, do see that the higher level recursion is not the sum of the lower levels. That is very, very important. Now, very, very often, when you get to something like research and development, you find that the total company has got in place R&D activity in all its units, and they think that that's it. And never is. And that's where they get caught out, of course, because huge new innovations come out of the total industrial setting and not out of some particular thing which is already more or less redundant and archaic. But little do they know it, but it's from a wider point of view, you can see it's had it. I mean, nobody's buying 33 1/3 vinyls any longer. There were people around saying, we will always do this. Just as Hugh Cudlip always used to say to me, people will always read the Daily Mirror, and I said, I doubt it. We sold 5.25 million copies a day when I was there. It's half that now, less than half. So, what are you going to find in System 4? Marketing, well, some of the marketing is going to be in 3, isn't it? Let's be a bit more precise about the terms. Market research you're going to find in 4. Advertising certainly on that loop. R&D I've already mentioned, but we better make it very precise. That's probably the major thing. Come on, there's a lot of more you could shove in here if you let your mind roam. Absolutely, and of course customer relations come in at this next level down System 4. They've got to look to their customers, but there's going to be an overall customer relations problem. Policy, with a bit of luck, which is going to come out of System 4.
The body of people that set like safety standards.
Well, that's very interesting, because I reckon that a thing like that has to come out of the ethos right at the top of the organization, but you know very well where safety is going to be dealt with in this model, don't you, Catherine?
Well, could be dealt with several places.
Yes, it could. Well, analyze it.
You've got to have laws about safety.
Mm-hmm.
So that's your red line.
That's red line, yes.
Okay. You're going to have safety checks, so that's coming down the green line.
Right.
Anybody else want to jump in here?
Well, you're missing the most obvious thing.
Level 1.
Well, yes, but now you've slipped to level of recursion. We were looking at this level.
The shareholders, because they're going to say policy, which really not. Ultimately, your answer is what they want. They're the answer.
Quite so. What are you... We're talking about safety here, Lee. Excuse me, let's just wrap that up. We'll come back to this. No, the most... No, the system 2, for goodness sake. You're trying to stop oscillating behaviour. It's no use sending somebody out of this line into the next line without a hard hat if he's going to have rocks dropped on his head. You know, there has to be a uniform understanding through the company of what is safe practice in our kind of industry, doesn't there? And that's where it will get fed in. So you stumbled on a very interesting thing, which is evident with all these major functions like safety. Certainly it is in accounting that when you start looking at some issue of financial management, let's call it, you find it in all these 5 systems. And that's a very powerful method of analysis, because you're no longer dealing with their technical jargon and their close-knit little group of experts. You can see where some of it's going down here, some of it's going down here, and that's why I got in a tangle yesterday, much to my embarrassment, when I said there are 6 lines and we could only find 5, because system 2 was the 6th. So the whole idea is that the vertical, that's this way, vertical and the horizontal varieties ultimately match. That's the key. Now, we were talking about System 4. Let's get back to Lee's point. The shareholders, indeed. Well, they're a very mysterious lot, aren't they? Because most of them don't even know what the business is about. And the theory of enterprise is very, very short on this. I got into a terrible skirmish with Mr. Macmillan, who was Harold's son. What was his name? Who was a minister. And he was a Tory, with this big banner saying a property-owning democracy. And he said everybody should have shares in everything that they can afford, and then we spread authority and we spread responsibility and so on. Oh, come on. I've got 100 shares in General Motors. You know, I have to be taken seriously. I should go. Now, nonetheless, of course, the point is a correct one, and legally this is the state of affairs. So you get people buying the 100 shares in order to go and stir up hell at the annual general meeting, as you well know. But not nearly enough is that done. So, I mean, I've worked in these huge organizations all my life, mainly as a consultant, but also, as you know, as a manager, and you never hear the shareholders mentioned, ever, except when the annual general meeting's coming up. I was present. I was talking to the chairman over a drink in his office when the financial director came in, and I'm on the management at this stage, not a consultant. And the chairman said to the financial director, "How's it coming? I'm thinking of the AGM, because this is the one time and the chairman has to be up front and actually make himself visible enough to get shot." And the financial director, being typical financial director, very nice, quiet man, said, "Well, it's all right." And the chairman said, "Well, you know, what's the overall picture look like? Are we in profit? Are you in much profit? Are we hitting dicey periods?" Doesn't even know this, you notice, because you're running this huge, great machine. And the financial director said, so the chairman said, "Well, what's the balance sheet going to say next Thursday or next month?" And the financial director said, "What do you want it to say, Chairman?" Just that cool. terrible. I was really shocked at the time, but I've been around longer now, and I know that this is these things are doctored in all sorts of ways, and it's only when some cataclysmic event happens that somebody gets caught. I mean, what happened to poor old Bob Maxwell, who I knew awfully well, would happen to practically all the big shots if they died at the wrong moment without time to... You know, people borrow money from funds all over the place and pay them back and maneuver the thing. And the idea that this guy is actually sort of burying gold bricks in the cellar, you know, and stealing the money is the popular press kind of version. What the guys are doing is having an enormous amount of fun manipulating all sorts of things. So I get very tired of this. I mean, there's a whole lot of seminars on business ethics these days which they're not founded in reality at all, to me. So, it's your point, Lee. I've held forth about this. What are you going to say about it?
I'm not.
Well, they should do, is the short answer, but they're marginalised.
Don't stockholders just see the company, or generally see the company as a black box, though? Your input is your £2.50 per share.
Absolutely, absolutely. I did say that most of them don't know what the company does, and that applies even to the extent of external directors, you know. I said to one very famous lord, whose name was bought, you see, to put on the letterhead, I said, according to Who's Who, Tony, you are a director of 47 companies. Do you really think you could tell me what they all do? And he said, don't ask silly questions, have another drink. How could he? No, not requisite variety, you see. You just take your little fee, look down the balance sheet, say, well, that seems to be healthy enough.
Problem here. We keep talking about organisations and the level 4 seems to be very high level, talking about shareholders and advertising, market research, whatever. If you were somewhere lower down in your manufacturing company, so you're in a different level of recursion. So what you've got is on system 1 is a group of machines working autonomously.
Okay.
What would the system 4 be there?
Well, it's it's this one. See, the way I draw this, let me try and put this in. I'll put it in, I've run out of colours. I'll put this in red so that you can see it. Inside this box, which we now know as System 1, at the next level of recursion, is 5, 4, 3, 2, 3 star. It's all there. So you've got the whole thing reduplicated. Now, at this lowly level, System 4, I mean, depends how lowly we are. I mean, if you're talking about a weaving shed in Lancashire, the System 4 is the boss in the shed who has a bath once a month and has a good idea. You see, if that's the best you can do. But if it's a division of ICI, there's all this research going on, and the members of the division ought to be able to find out what it is. That's why you have the company newsletter and so on going across here. Whether they can find out what this one is another matter altogether. And a lot of it's secret, you see, because you're planning into the future. I want to stop this session here because of the time factor. But I just want to remind you, do you know what the buggy whip syndrome is? Ever heard of it? Well, I'm very fond of this. Everybody used to know what this was about 30 years ago, and it just dropped out of the currency. Here is a manufacturer of buggy whips. A buggy is a little horse-drawn cart, and this great long whip, you know. So he proves his machinery, he proves his leather, does all the right things, cuts his cost, can't understand why he's making a loss. see? Doesn't happen to have noticed that buggies are going out. Motor cars are taking over. See? Now, this is a very serious problem, and nobody mentioned corporate planning as a name when we were talking about what's in System 4, but probably that's the most important thing. Well, indeed, you know, you pay the words extra and make them mean what you like. It's, yes. I think in my nomenclature I have strategy at level 3, and I call 4 developmental and 5 normative. So we haven't got 5 yet. Let's put it in for the sake of completeness. You see, we've got these two things being the inside and now and the outside and then. Now, we've got this massive problem, haven't we? And I usually put these huge arrows in like this. What is this that I'm drawing, folks? What is this? A homeostat, you see. Now, the problem is, you have got to balance your investment, and I don't just mean money, I mean time, care, attention, talent, in between keeping the show on the road and looking out in a rapidly changing world. And this is no easy task. So this is why you need a System 5 in the end, because System 5 is much more concerned with monitoring that homeostat than with issuing orders down here. Let's leave it at that, and then we'll blow this up and have a good look at it after the break. Thank you.